I just wish I could have protected her like I told her I would.
Gunned down, shot in the back one night while working.
I'm tired of vigils. I'm tired of the crying. I'm tired of the anxiety.
All of these people were shot and killed in Portland in 2020 or 2021.
Who gives you the right to be God? Who gives you the right to choose who lives and dies?
I'm Dan Haggerty. Tonight, along with investigative reporters Kristen Severance and Kyle Aboshi, we're dedicating the entire show to the issue of gun violence and the families left behind. The dad who lost his son.
I got a phone call from one of his friends on Snapchat, and it's pretty much like, Javelin got shot, it's a blood everywhere. He's not waking up.
The son without a father.
I think he was really looking forward, to raising his son.
People are dying in Portland at a rate we haven't seen in 34 years, when Portland's gang problem was at its worst.
Right now there's a war going on in the streets. I don't know if Portland community realizes this, but there's a war going on in the streets, okay?
We are about to pass those record-breaking numbers from 3 decades ago. And if you haven't taken the time to think about this issue or understand why this is happening, it's time. Time to hear from the families.
In the black community, it's the saying, it takes a village to raise a kid. So when these kind of things happen, it forces the family to analyze itself, to sit there and where did we go wrong?
It's time to hear from law enforcement.
But the numbers are what tell the story. The data tells the story. That's pretty scary that we're going to take that high point from over 20 years ago and exceed that easily at this point.
Time to hear from the people who lived the gang life and got out.
As we look at so many issues, we don't let a novice guide us, or we don't let a theoretical expert guide us. We want practical experience.
From people who understand why it's so bad.
Step back and really try to look at what are the root causes, recognizing that there's not just one primary driver.
Is it COVID? Is it gangs? Is it unemployment? Is it all the above?
I would say all the above.
And how we can even begin to address it. There is no story more important than this one tonight. This is the story, Understanding Gun Violence.
It's like a bomb just hit, and everyone's been in shock and emotional up and down, like a piece to the puzzle is missing.
Think of every family like a puzzle. Each person is a piece.
I was thinking he's still gonna drive up and give us a hug, and then we have to remember that's not gonna happen. Yeah, so I think we're all going through that.
The Adams family may never feel complete again. A piece to their puzzle, 28-year-old Koa Adams, is gone for good. Jennifer Adams was Koa's sister-in-law.
He loves the music, he loves to dance, and he's just somebody who everybody wants to be around, and he's all about family and being together.
Koa and his brother-in-law, 31-year-old Frank Guland, were shot and killed on the same day in the early morning hours of January 17th. The family said they were in their yard, listening to music and hanging out when it happened. Jennifer got the call that morning from Koa's partner, Julissa.
And Julissa was crying, couldn't speak for I don't know how many days. So his 3 kids are not knowing what's going on and waiting for Dad to come back home. 2 girls, and then the youngest is a boy. He's so happy with his son, so proud of him, and I think he was really looking forward, to raising his son. So I think all the family knows how much he loved his children, and that breaks our heart, to know they have to go without knowing the love of their father.
Frank and his own daughter lived with Koa and Julissa.
So they were all there together, and both dads were gone at the same time.
The double homicide remains unsolved.
What have police told you about who did this? Do you have any ideas, any leads?
No, the detectives can't tell us anything specific because it could ruin the investigation, and we've just been told they need witnesses to come forward. But
Adams said neither men had gang ties or really any enemies at all.
we have no knowledge of anything like that or any reason to believe that they should have enemies at all, or an enemy especially that would be justified in shooting and killing them in a moment like that.
In 2019, the city of Portland had 389 shootings. In 2020, that number more than doubled to almost 900. In 2021, Portland is on pace to have more than 1,000 shootings by the end of the year.
My name is Kieran Ramsey, and I'm the special agent in charge here for the Portland office of the FBI.
Ramsey took over as the FBI's top agent in Oregon in January. He moved here from Washington, D.C. He did not think overwhelming gun violence on the streets of Portland would be his top priority.
This sounds like a cliche local news question. But I have to ask, I think it's a good starting point. You know, why do you believe the gun violence problem has gotten so bad?
I don't know that I have an easy answer to that question, actually, even though you would think there should be some clear-cut answers.
The city of Portland has seen a huge spike in homicides. 56 homicides in 2020, the most in 26 years. 70% were gun-related. And more than 40 homicides so far in 2021. Part of the reason the FBI is even involved in investigating local crimes.
When we look at some of the challenges that our colleagues over at the Portland Police Bureau are facing, I think we're past the conversation of them having to do more with less. Now it's a conversation of them having to do less with less.
Ramsey said the FBI has offered personnel, resources, and funding. For example, paying the overtime of officers working on shooting investigations. You'll now see FBI agents on every shooting scene in Portland, Gresham, or in Multnomah County, all part of the FBI's Safe Streets Task Force. They'll work as a team to decide if they should pursue gun cases at the federal or local level. And they'll up the rewards for tips in partnership with Crime Stoppers.
I'm hopeful that the rest of the community sees the seriousness with which law enforcement takes this and steps up themselves at the same time in full measure, not in isolated groups, to say enough's enough. This is supposed to be a beautiful city. I moved here from the East Coast, from a city that's arguably a little rougher. Portland's not supposed to be this way.
But the elephant in the room is the distrust in Portland of federal involvement or of police in general. The hesitation to come forward with any information at all.
When you talk about people who are afraid to talk to somebody, we're at the top of that list.
Interim Gresham Police Chief Claudio Granjon, whose department is part of the FBI Safe Streets Task Force and whose own city has seen a high number of shootings this year, said it's a real issue. Gresham had 33 shootings in 2019, 54 in 2020, 74 so far this year, which is on pace to be more than 150 shootings by the end of the year. Chief Granjon told me they're working with community partners to try and stop gun violence, but he didn't want to tell me the name of the groups.
I hesitate to mention the groups because we want those groups to continue to be culturally specific. We want them to have comfort level in reaching out to the people they need to reach out to. And I don't know that I do any justice to those groups if I identify them.
I understand.
Just to know that they have a role and a job to do, and we want to let them do that.
So that brings me to kind of this entire issue. People are scared to talk about this. You know, victims' families are scared to say anything, you know, for a variety of reasons, including gangs. You know, these nonprofits doing this amazing work in the community, they don't really want to talk about it. You don't really want to say you're partnering with them because you don't want to hurt their efforts. I mean, how do you even begin to stop this when it's just so difficult?
So I think everyone needs to understand their role. You know, you're right. People are afraid. They're particularly afraid to talk to police, right? So in getting with some of these community groups in reaching out to the community and improving our relationship with the community, hopefully we can improve our chances of hearing some of the information we need to hear.
Like, they don't come off except for when I'm showering, you know, I'm like, that's it.
Cash Carter understands why people are leery to go to police. He's had his own bad experiences. His son, Jalen, was shot and killed in 2020 at a park in Portland.
They've pretty much, just to be bluntly honest, I've heard more from the streets than I've heard from the police. And that's just being honest about it.
Jalen was just 16 years old.
Very likable. You know, he had a lot of friends. You know, he had way more friends than I even imagined. And I seen that after he was murdered, like all the love everybody had for him. Basketball player, loves soccer, great brother, good friend, a very loyal friend. He was all around a caring person.
4 kids were shot that night. Jalen was the only one who died.
Eventually, my cousin, he took me. He drove me up to the park where it happened at. And that's when I finally, ID'd him and just knew that he was gone.
Carter still doesn't know who killed Jalen, but he's positive someone knows what happened. He said when people don't come forward, it only hurts these fractured families even more.
As far as tips and leads and information like that, like, I can understand that there are people that don't want to say anything because out of fear of retaliation, out of fear that the police might, say something that's not true to them or about them. But here's the thing, if you love Jalen, if you cared about Jalen and you know something, don't be afraid to say something about it. I mean, it's very important. Just because you don't want to have people thinking that these things could be done and you won't be held accountable.
Jennifer Adams knows someone knows something about who killed Koa and Frank too.
I would just hope people could maybe see Koa and Frank as loving fathers and people that didn't deserve this.
The little piece of information you may know that you think is insignificant might be a really important piece to the investigators who have the whole picture. And so sometimes seemingly meaningless or trivial information is actually might be real critical in putting an entire case together.
Like the missing piece.
Exactly, yeah.
We all want to feel like our lives matter. I think that's what we want, to feel like their lives matter, that they didn't deserve that.
When we talk about solutions, people with lived experience like yourself, why is it important that we look to people like you with that experience?
Police have just told us 7 people were shot late last night. The latest number in the last hour.
Between Saturday afternoon and Sunday night, officers responded to 5 shootings.
Now know 4 people were found dead inside of a house, shot and killed in southeast Portland. This happened.
Right now there's a war going on in the streets. I don't know if Portland community realizes this, but there's a war going on in the streets, okay?
So what's the solution? For the past few weeks, I've been listening to those who work directly with people closest to gun violence. And what I'm hearing is there is an answer, but it's not simple.
It's not going to be easy, and it's not going to be overnight.
And it's a strategy different than what we've done before.
And some of it may be non-conventional. Some of it may be approaches that in a normal, regular situation may not be appropriate. But this war that's going on in these streets are not based on things that are necessarily rational to everyday human beings.
The immediate solution? One idea is violence interrupters to help stop the shooting. That means trusting people with real life experience to intervene and steer others away from trouble.
When the guys come and they say, oh man, you was in jail too? Oh yeah, you did this much time? Oh wait, you used to gangbang? How did you get to do this? That spark opens up, now we can dialogue.
Instead of a PhD on their resume, these peer mentors might have a criminal record or been affiliated with a gang. And that's the point, explained community activist Royal Harris, who himself grew up in gang culture in the 1980s.
I mean, as we look at so many issues, we don't let a novice guide us, or we don't let a theoretical expert guide us. We want practical experience, and within this, we have gentlemen who've been experts at this, who've lived through it since 1988, since 1986, since 1985.
Then give these people elbow room and the freedom to help stop the shootings, explained Daryl Turbin, who's created intervention programs used around the country.
What I'm saying is putting the money in the hands of the people who can formulate those relationships, who can build those relationships, who can sit these men at the table from these street organizations and say, hey, what do we need to do to stop? If it's money, if it's resources, whatever we need to make this happen, let's do that. And allocating that money to the people who can have those conversations. That's what I mean. The resources need to go directly to that. I believe if we spent $100,000, we can stop shooting at least for a week.
Another solution: provide opportunity, a job, mentorship, neighborhood and youth programs. That gives people structure, which builds greater hope, explained Brett O. Jackson, whose organization, Leaders Become Legends, does just that, putting young men to work.
Anytime you can provide for your family or provide for yourself and also save and then learn how to invest, once you save, you tend to shift your focus from being active in the streets into being more active in the community and for your family.
But these solutions only work if there's stable funding for community-based programs and the criminal justice system, explained Erica Pruitt, director of Multnomah County Department of Community Justice.
I think that there's a community solution, and I also believe that there is a law enforcement solution. And I think that there's resources that are needed on both sides. But I think what's the most important is the collaboration with the community and law enforcement, as well as the healing. And that's on multiple levels with multiple systems within the criminal justice system.
Many of those closest to the gun violence crisis tend to agree on solutions. The challenge is getting buy-in from the community.
You know, at some point, the city and Multnomah County is going to have to say, do Black lives really matter? And if they really matter, then maybe we ought to use the people in the community who can make a difference in this, empower them and give them resources they need in order to do the work to stop these shootings that are happening in this community.
So, why has gun violence gotten so bad here? Well, the FBI told Kristen that there's no easy answer. So why don't we take a few minutes and do some of the hard work? And let's go right to the obvious thing, the pandemic. COVID-19 is probably the biggest culprit in the spike in shootings, but let's look more specifically at why. I found a study from the John Jay College of Criminal Justice in New York where they broke down some of the key ways generally to reduce gun violence in a community. Here they are, the 6 key factors they have listed. I thought it'd be interesting if we considered how the pandemic has affected these factors that, again, directly play into gun violence. Number 1, improve the physical environment. Well, Portland's never been more covered in trash and graffiti. The suffering of homelessness has never been more visible. Businesses spent a year with boards in the windows and closed signs in their doors. The typical maintenance of our parks and green spaces, that's been cut back or postponed. Certainly not improved. Number 2, strengthen anti-violence social norms and peer relationships. Well, this certainly isn't happening, is it? Community events everywhere have been canceled. Social services and face-to-face check-ins, they got scaled back. Reports of domestic violence spiked. And research points to a rise in unreported child abuse, bullying, and thoughts of suicide. Let's check number 3, engage and support youth. The study mentions the importance in this section of youth employment, but there hasn't been much of that with everything closed, along with schools being closed too, and pretty much everything else. 4, reduce substance abuse. Oregon liquor stores made record sales in 2020. The marijuana industry exploded. Oregonians bought more than $1 billion of weed in 2020. And nationally, overdose deaths accelerated, making 2020 one of the worst years for drug abuse in recent history. Not to mention the services that we use to help people, they were shut down or scaled back considerably. Even AA meetings were canceled. Number 5, mitigate financial stress. Do I even need to elaborate this one? People lost jobs in record numbers. Unemployment trickled in. Some people went months without seeing a dime. Food banks became totally overwhelmed with new families. Some of the area's most established pantries struggled to keep up with the need. And lastly, reduce the harmful effects of the justice process. Now, lawmakers and society as a whole were actively working on this one, at times with progressive and controversial solutions. But a recent PBS NPR poll found that 2/3 of Black Americans don't trust the police to treat them equally, and that simply makes it harder for those police to solve crimes. All of these factors matter, none more than poverty. And in Portland, in the neighborhoods we're talking about, a disproportionate amount of the people living in our poorest communities are people of color. I met with Ebony Clark to discuss this. She's the interim health department director in Multnomah County.
With the pandemic, with issues of structural racism, with issues of inequities when it comes to social determinants of health, it's a perfect storm.
In 2019, Scientific America released a study on more than 13,000 firearm-related deaths, and they found that gun homicides were directly linked to poor social mobility.
It's a multi-pronged issue. You know, people are trying to survive. And so if I can't get a job, I see my mom crying every day because she's worried that we're about to get evicted. I have an opportunity to maybe go down the street and get some work under the table. What am I going to do? And then, the likelihood of, if I get caught, then, now I have a record. When you're trying to climb out, when you're trying to be self-sufficient, and every time you're getting turned down, it starts to have an impact on you. And so if there's a crowd over here who understands what I'm going through, who sees me for who I am and accepts me, then there's a strong likelihood I'm going to veer over to this group who has the same experiences as I do.
You probably noticed that I haven't mentioned policing. And that's not because it doesn't matter, because it does. But as far as the factors that create gun violence, a simple lack of officers isn't necessarily one of them. For instance, if you took Oregon's safest community, say, and cut its police force in half, people wouldn't suddenly start shooting each other. But if you took that same community and you filled the streets with trash and homeless camps, and you brought most families below the poverty line, and you closed schools with no tools for remote learning, and created widespread food insecurity and spiked drug use, well, the research says there, violence would follow. That's why policing wasn't included in this list. But I can understand if you want it to be, because historically, that's how we've handled these things. Despite what many activists may say, there is overwhelming evidence that more aggressive policing and dedicated units can quell a spike in gun crimes. But Portland hasn't added more officers. They've cut them, along with 6% of the budget, about $15 million. I searched for an example or a study or something that shows what happens when a major city responds to a historic spike in violent crime with a historic slashing of its police budget. I didn't find anything. There is no example that I could find. And I realized perhaps we're in that study now, that it's being conducted on our streets with the lives of Portlanders on the line. This is just the start of our coverage on gun violence. What did we miss? What should be next? Email us at thestory@kgw.com.